You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
Welcome to Heritage Voices, episode 85. I'm Jessica Quinto, and I'm your host. And today we are talking about the Kathryn M. Center for American Indian Studies at Washington University in St. Louis. Before we begin, I'd like to honor and acknowledge that the lands I'm recording on today are part of the Nooch, or Ute Peoples, treaty lands, the Deneta, and the ancestral Puebloan homeland. So today we have Eric Pinto on the show. Eric is a Native American descendant of the Mississippi Band of Choctaw Indians and Pueblo of Zuni, and is the Assistant Director at the Kathryn M. Center for American Indian Studies at Washington University in St. Louis, where he supports Booter scholars, recruits prospective Native American students, collaborates with community partners on Native American projects and events, and provides educational presentations throughout Missouri. So welcome to the show, Eric.
Yeah, Halito, hello. Yeah, thank you. I'm excited about this. My very first podcast ever participating in.
I love it. That's awesome. Well, I'm very excited to have you as well. You came very highly recommended from a fabulous past guest. So I'm very excited to talk to you. And also, I'm really excited because we always touch on a lot of the topics that you're going to be talking about today in our work in heritage and cultural resources, but not directly from this angle. Well, I'll let you introduce what the Booter Center does. I won't get too into it, but I think it's going to be really important for people that work in heritage and CRM and anthropology and land management to have some understanding of some of the things that you guys work on. So I'm very excited to have you. So, speaking of me being super vague about what it is that you do, what got you interested in what it is that you do?
Yeah, so I guess it all stems back to when I was actually a personal trainer. This is prior to COVID. I was actually a personal trainer here in St. Louis for 10 years, working through Gold's Gym. And within that, I wanted to find out a way to reach Native communities on helping improve their health disparities and increasing opportunities to access to gyms and ways to exercise to improve physical activity, resulting in better health outcomes. I kind of think it was also divine intervention that one day I went and visited Cahokia Mountains, which is right next door to me. And I was going up there to visit some Native artists who are friends to the family. And I ran into, at the time, the director of the Booter Center. And, we just got to talk and everything. And she was asking, what I do and everything. And, what would I like to do? And maybe how I could maybe contribute to giving back to our people and stuff. And so from there, she kind of promoted the Booter Center and how it offers scholarships to Native students. And I had the fortunate opportunity to apply for a scholarship and get tuition paid for and go to Washington University in St. Louis and be part of the Brown School of Social Work, Public Health, and Social Policy. And within that, I was part of the American Indian Alaska Native concentration. This is all through the social work program. And I was kind of looking at ways to develop my skills, enhance my knowledge on ways to create these types of programs, health programs, to help Native people out. And from there, it kind of was going towards that direction until the pandemic happened. And then from there, things were halted and stalled. But luckily, when I graduated from the program back in 2020, the Booter Center kind of acknowledged that, hey, you live here in St. Louis and you do great work. And how about you hop on board with the Booter Center and do some community-based projects and research? And so I've held multiple positions here at the Booter Center.
Yeah. So can you talk a little bit more about some of that work that you were doing when you were getting your master's, kind of some of the different areas that you were focusing on before getting it, and then also, once you started working for the Booter Center?
Yeah, so when I was a student, I was very new to what do social workers even do? I kind of knew they work maybe in a hospital setting or, some type of health clinic. But, other than that, I was not aware of how broad the field is really. And, I was happy to kind of dive into kind of like the education side, looking at school social work. And I worked with a curator of invertebrates at the St. Louis Zoo. He has an initiative called Native Foods, Native Peoples, Native Pollinators. And he helps supports tribes or Native people, Native communities with any food sovereignty projects. So I got to assist him with that. And right about that time, that was when actually, the pandemic happened and stuff. So the program itself really allowed me to see what's available out there and what direction I go into. But then once, graduation happened and it was still like pandemic time. And I was offered that position to work for the Booter Center. We were still working, virtually and trying to figure out ways we can still engage with the community and maybe educating them about Native people, what's going on, in our communities and such. One of the very first projects I worked on was called the Digital Indigenous Storytelling Project. So I interviewed Native people who lived in St. Louis and throughout Missouri and really just got their story, how they ended up in St. Louis or Missouri, their family background, their heritage, how they stay connected with their culture. Because a lot of people are unaware that actually here in St. Louis and Missouri, like there's no reservations, there's no large Native populations in these areas. So it was really diving into that side of the story. And I got to meet some folks that I really didn't know before. And so I built definitely some new relationships. I still stay in touch with those people. And I think one of my highlights was actually interviewing Craig Berube he's a Cree Nation, and he's a head coach now former head coach of the St. Louis Blues hockey team. So, and I'm a diehard Blues fan. So for me, I was fanboying and I was just like, oh my gosh, it's Craig Berube. Like, this is amazing. This is awesome. Get to hear his story. So so that was like one of the first projects that we worked on. And that too, that whole project there was funded by the Missouri Humanities. And they're one of our close partners, and they do a lot of great work in creating programs and events throughout the state of Missouri that helps highlight like Missouri's like cultures and histories and all that great stuff. So very fortunate to be partners with them on numerous projects and events. Yeah. And then, and then from there, it kind of led into another project that really got me interested into like archaeology. And I still love that area. And I did a lot of research since it was kind of during the lockdown time still, and really looking at the Native history here in St. Louis and Missouri, but also creating a document in the form of like a report or a brief that can educate the community. Because like I said, the community here, is primarily non-Native, and they're just unaware of, what is the history of this land and the people that are tied to this land and have those connections. So I was really getting at that through an archaeological lens, which, as I mentioned, I'm not an archaeologist. So that some things were definitely a challenge for me to understand. But I picked up on that, through readings and videos and all sorts of things, and networking with archaeologists here as well, too. So, and we're right next door to Cahokia Mounds, which is just an amazing site. I'll tell people, like, growing up, like, and it didn't really click until more recent that I had to actually make multiple trips out there when creating this report to fully understand, that history and that one, kind of like that unique period in time was going on at that site. But then, it kind of got me more interested into, those other time frames that was kind of happening and their connections to the land here throughout Missouri. So it's been very interesting. And, we have other state parks around the area. It's not just only Cahokia Mounds is like the closest site. It's, we got like Macedon State Park, we got Washington State Park, and they all have their very unique like history. So Macedon State Park like kind of really shows like, that Paleo-Indian period and connections with hunting, mastodons, back a long time ago. And Washington State Park has petroglyphs there that you can still see. And these are the types of places where I really try and tell people you need to go visit there and connect the dots throughout time and show that, hey, our ancestors, Native people have been here for thousands of years. And that's why this land, it's so important to us. Like, that's why we have such an intimate connection with the land and the environment.
Yeah. So what you were just talking about there, you have a brief that you sent me ahead of time. It's Indigenous Land, Peoples, and History of Missouri. So we'll make that available for everybody in the show notes.
Yeah. And then, I think after creating that brief and doing all that research and visiting different sites, around St. Louis and, Missouri, it made me kind of feel like I want to be a protector of this land and these sites, because St. Louis is definitely booming with development. So it's also kind of been a great opportunity to meet other folks, in different areas around the city that are wanting to do good by incorporating policies or protocols that they need to follow in order to make sure that they're not destroying something significant to, Native people with those ancestral connections to the land. Yeah. And then, from there, after, kind of creating that brief, the school started opening up, went from more virtual back to kind of like a hybrid version. And, eventually I was actually promoted to this current position here as assistant director. And I'm doing more student affairs type of work and recruitment. But, as far as like relationships with the local organizations and other partners here, like such as I mentioned, like the St. Louis Zoo, we also work with the St. Louis Art Museum, the Historical Society, Yes, Missouri Humanities, and many other organizations and institutions in the area to support one another who are wanting to do all kinds of like Native related projects or events. And so the Booter Center's kind of like become a hub of like providing support, or, if someone needs a sense of direction, because many of those folks in those other areas are non-native. So they like some direction. They like hearing our voice, which has been great. And then that's been also networking with the local Native community here. I mentioned it's not very large. It's a smaller, tight-knit community. And one of my missions is to actually build that network up, because it was always a challenge growing up here in St. Louis. And I would never really see too many other Native folks around where I lived at in my community. The only time I would is when WashU would host its powwow, or there might have been some other powwows at the time, growing up. But outside of that, I was, all through school, I was the only Native person. So I really stuck out. But at the same time, too, it poses a challenge in my own personal identity of who I'm Native, how I'm Native, and how do I learn more about my people, history, and culture. Booter Center's been kind of a great place to kind of network and build those connections up with people. And, with these Native projects and events, we bring the local Native community members in, so that way they could have a voice and some say into, what are some things that we should do, because a lot of times, a lot of organizations and institutions, like they'll do different projects and events, but they're not building relationships with Native people and communities. And that's a big major component. So. All
right. Well, we are already at our first break point, but when we come back, I want to hear more about some of those specific initiatives that came out of working together with the local community. So we will be right back here in a second. Okay. So getting back from our break, I want to hear more about this community engagement efforts and the projects that came out of it that you just mentioned.
Yeah, so one of the first community-based projects I worked on was focused on trail marker trees. And the Booter Center was approached by our Office of Sustainability and the landscape company that maintains the grounds here at WashU. Yeah, I was unfamiliar with exactly what was happening and being proposed and when it came to this project, because, I kind of heard local kind of stories about trail marker trees being bent and stuff. And so I actually had to do my own personal research on this, and there's limited research, but there have been people who focus on it. And for folks that don't know, these specific tree species were selected by Native people a long time ago, and they were intentionally bent to point towards directions, maybe to sacred sites, resources, maybe easier access ways through places such as maybe rivers, creeks, et cetera. And so I had to do that research first in order to understand exactly what trail marker trees were and what direction this how this tree will be planted and be seen here at WashU. So with partnership with the Office of Sustainability and the landscape company, we thought, hey, let's work with the local Native community members. We want to create focus groups and let them know, like, hey, we received a grafted tree from an arborist from Athens, Illinois, and he stewarded this the mother tree, and was an identified trail marker tree that dates back to 1730. And so that mother tree, unfortunately, fell down during a storm, and the arborist took clippings of that from the tree and saved that. And one of our landscape managers was actually able to bring some of those clippings to WashU. Our goal was to plant that grafted tree with that tree clipping, network with the local Native community members on, how that should be done, because we view plants and animals and the elements in our environment as our relatives. So we want to have a welcoming of that tree into the new place that will be planted at. And so we also thought about, hey, like, we just don't only want to leave the tree here. Like, we got to make sure that, we're taking care of it. How do we make this tree feel more comfortable? How do we also, maybe bring this project as a more educational opportunity to highlight Native connections to plants and how plants were viewed and utilized? So we've had focus groups on talking about, yes, let's plant the tree. Had a planting ceremony, you would want to say, to welcome that tree. And then our next steps were then to incorporate native plants that, have kind of some type of relationship and significance to Native people. And those plants would also have display colors that would be representative of the medicine wheel, because we always touch back on, our health and well-being in connections to the teachings of like the 4 directions and the medicine wheel. So we thought, hey, let's incorporate plants that might display colors like that. We also thought about having conversations about, is this tree going to be bent? Because that was kind of like the very iconic feature of trail marker trees, is that they are intentionally bent. Now, some trees, like, they would have like this double 90-degree bend. Other trees that have this nice, great, bend. And so we thought about, should this tree be bent? So we're in this place where we have time to really consider that, working with local Native community, trying to reach out to tribes with ancestral connections to this area to get their thoughts and opinions on this. So, some community members here, though, like, they've already kind of said, like, if we were to bend this tree, like, what direction should we bend it? And we thought, maybe this should be pointed towards the east. And so the justification was that because St. Louis has the arch, this was like the big one, so gateway to the west. So we said, like, maybe we point this towards the east, to kind of, decolonize that whole mindset. And then also, too, we, many tribes, they have many teachings, as far as like directions go. So the east is very significant to many tribes with, a new day, new life, birth, things like that. So, and then we also, pointing towards the east direction, we also point towards the great rivers, such as the Mississippi and where Missouri's at, where that confluence is. And we know there's so much history with that, especially during that Mississippian period. And you saw so much trading going on at Cahokia. So there's that aspect. And also, too, the east direction points towards from where, the mother tree was at, in Illinois. Those are still conversations that, we're still having. And, we're going to have a meeting here soon, actually, in fact, I think next week. And we're going to talk about informational panels and how to create like a website that create information for people to go to learn more about trail marker trees and this specific trail marker tree and its story and origins and everything. So, yeah, so that was like the first like community-based project I really worked on, and really networking with the local Native community and get them involved. And it's been building ever since. Yeah.
Okay. So I want to play a little bit of devil's advocate here. Obviously, I know how social work and, health and well-being and all of those things tie into heritage and archaeology and history and all of those things. but let's say I don't. How is this all tied to social work, like what you're talking about here? I mean, how is this part of a social work program?
Yeah, so I think for us, it's kind of goes back to what I was saying about educating the community, creating awareness, because Native people have been dealing with assimilation, genocide, erasure, and it still exists today, in all different forms. So I think these are different ways that fight against that within our own community. As far as social work as a whole, I'm trying to relate it to like archaeology specifically. Like I can kind of say like, for us, it's, reconnecting those people, those tribes that were pushed out from their ancestral homelands, such as like the Osage Nation. So they have very strong claims to here. And so it's connecting their people with areas here, and it could be just notifying them in their TIPO office and saying like, hey, there's this new development that's going on, but we're aware that, there's sites here that might need to be, checked out. And we kind of understand now the process, and we're not archaeologists or social workers. So actually it's a great opportunity for us to learn of, having to connect with like the state historic preservation office and local archaeologists and knowing like, what are these processes and protocols that are needed, to do like certain surveys or, reporting and such. But it kind of goes back to just, I think, reconnecting people and protecting a lot of these different sites and, protecting like artifacts, that might be significant to people, and even possibly, burials, remains and returning those remains or however the tribes may see fit. There's just so much history here in St. Louis that, what it comes down to, it's really serving the people and making sure that we're looking after, our people's health and well-being, and, we're looking into the future as well, too. We oftentimes, look at like kind of like the teachings of the 7 generations, it's, everything, I think in modern society, like we're looking at like what's happening like right now, and we look at the immediate problem and treat it or fix it, but we're not looking ahead and, looking at like what are the root issues. And, this is like even like one conversation we kind of get into when it comes to social work. And we have a very world-renowned medical school for a lot of, people who want to become doctors or go into other health professions and stuff. I just gave a presentation that kind of touched on those things on, kind of like indigenous health and wellness and versus like kind of like Western medicine. Those things kind of intertie and stuff. But as I mentioned, like, everything is interconnected, and we want to make sure that ultimately things are being taken care of appropriately and done the right way. So that way things aren't lost.
Okay, so first, I didn't say hi specifically by name, but I do want to say hi to Dr. Seth Grooms for connecting us and for showing how, social work can really tie into all of these different things that we were talking about in our episode. Can you give like a specific example within St. Louis of how that works, or a project? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I've had the fortunate opportunity to meet local archaeologists in the area. And, one cool thing is that I got to see some places and know about places and sites, that aren't far from home that I didn't even know about. But really, when you think about it, Native people have been all over this land for thousands of years, so it shouldn't be really surprising. But, I got to meet a gentleman, Mark Leach. He has a few publications, and it's focused on a couple sites out in what we call West County. It's west of downtown St. Louis and the suburbs of St. Louis County. The one side is Blake Mound, the other is Dampier site. And, those have relationships to Cahokia, during that Mississippian period. But Chesterfield actually has been booming with, people moving into the area, new developments with, new malls, shops, restaurants, bars, you name it. Like that place is just, booming all over. With that boom, it's threatening, some of those sites. And recently, a residential company called McBride Homes, they purchased an area near Blake Mound. And Blake Mound is, as you can kind of imagine, it's a mound. No surprise there. And that McBride Homes, they purchased area near Blake Mound. So there's definitely some worry about what could happen to that site. Could there be potential damage or, who knows? I've even received emails actually from local residents saying that they're even concerned because they know that like looters or people who are like, artifact collectors, like they're going into, the disturbed ground that, the construction crew is going through and rooting up, and they're trying to find like artifacts and stuff. And I got to visit Blake Mound. Mark took me out there, and it was, oh my gosh, you wouldn't think like there's a lot there, but there's so much. It's covered with, there's woods around there and brush, but really you can see like how significant this place was. And there's even like a cave that's underneath the mound, and he was kind of sharing, some insight about, that story there with the cave and how important that place may be. And unfortunately, they can't really get too far into the cave, I guess, due to like soil erosion and water carrying dirt and other debris. It's kind of blocked up the cave entrance pretty good. So he's actually working with a local high school robotics team on creating like a spider robot to go deeper into the cave. Wow. I think he even mentioned he's even blocked by, he thinks there's a skunk or some type of critter back there as well. But yeah, so with that site and the new developments have been happening out there, Mark reached out to me and he said like, hey, we're going to go speak in front of the Chesterfield City Council. And it was him and myself and another local archaeologist, Joe Harrell, who's done a lot of amazing work here in St. Louis. And so we each brought our own perspective on, what's happening here in Chesterfield and how can the city make sure to, be careful with these new developments and be more aware of protecting Native American sites. So, obviously for them, for Mark and Joe, they're coming at it from a more archaeological perspective. As for myself, I bring that Native voice and, I grew up here in the area. And I can really share like how important, that those types of things are to our people. Mm-hmm. And even though I'm not connected to, let's say like the Osage, I'm still going to be an advocate to them because, they're our relatives and stuff. And also too, I kind of look at it this way, the Choctaw people, they were also, you could say like mound builders as well too. So, who knows, like we're connected in that type of way that dates back to that Mississippian period. So there's just a lot of passion that goes behind, protecting these sites here. And as I mentioned, there's just the non-Native population is very high here and they're just not educated or informed about, these types of things. And we're just trying to prevent, those types of forms of erasure and, the importance of artifacts and sites just disappearing and not being returned to our people or being protected. So, yeah.
Right. And obviously all of the impacts that has on a person's health and well-being. It all ties together.
Right.
Exactly. All right. Well, we are already at our second break point, but I'm excited to come back in a minute and dive right back in. So we're back from our break, and you were talking about, the importance of the land, but then also this complicated history of, tribes being removed from the area, that there's no reservations currently within Missouri, and then this large urban Indian population within St. Louis. And if I remember from our last conversation, a lot of that community was specifically brought in the 70s, if I remember correctly.
Oh, yeah, the 1950s.
50s. Okay. Two decades off.
No, yeah. St. Louis was part of that Urban Relocation Program. And actually, that's how my grandparents met. So all my Native heritage is on my father's side, and his grandparents came up from their reservation. So my grandfather is Zuni, grandma is Choctaw from Mississippi. So they came up during that time, met in St. Louis, had a family, rest is history. But yeah, St. Louis was like that, one of those large cities during that time. And it's brought in, people from all different nations here in St. Louis. And some still live here. And then, others moved back home or whatever it may be. But many people don't realize that St. Louis was part of that. And they don't know the understanding, the full also underlying message behind that program. So it was emphasized by the federal government to promote like jobs, economic opportunities for Native people to move away from their tribes, their reservations, move into larger cities for those opportunities. But it was really meant as another like assimilative effort to really remove people from their people and their communities. And so, as I mentioned before, I had a hard time with my own identity, learning the history and culture and stuff, because there was another Choctaw and Zuni people around. They're my dad, a couple aunties, cousins, my grandparents that passed away when I was younger too. So it was always been a challenge, learning that type of stuff. And so I have to go back and do everything myself of learning like the language, the culture, the history. And so that's where I say that's where the government succeeded in that type of way. But yeah, St. Louis has that history there too as well.
So with all of that in mind, all those complicated layers of history tied to the land, how does the Booter Center frame, Indigenous connection to the land, I guess?
Yeah, so that's where we started working on, the Booter Center had created a land acknowledgement. I don't know at which point in time it was created, but as I came into this position here as assistant director and worked with the new director, we're really looking at hey, we need to update this and really look at what should be really included into a land acknowledgement and everything. Oftentimes land acknowledgements are created and it becomes more of a performative piece for people to do before presentations and conferences and stuff. And we want to make sure that, it's not that. Sure, we want to acknowledge the people who have ancestral connections to this land. And, we just don't want to also leave it at highlighting the unjust history, tied to that as well, too, within a statement, but really getting at hey, how do we develop relationships? How do we move forward? How do we keep learning ourselves? So those types of pieces are incorporated into our statement, and it holds us accountable, for those things on developing relationships with, tribal nations and Native people, working with Native people, educating the local Native community or non-Native community. It's all kinds of things that really holds an organization or institution accountable, and also can create a new set of responsibilities of how we can move forward and create better understanding and awareness within a community.
Mm. Yeah, and we'll put the link to the land acknowledgement in the show notes so people can check it out in full. And so you've talked about a lot of different areas of what the Booter Center does at Washington University in St. Louis. Are there any areas that we've missed that we haven't talked about yet?
Yeah, I will actually touch back on going back to the land acknowledgement piece. So the students here at the Brown School, we all have to do, or they have to do now. I still think sometimes I'm always a student, right? And the students have to create practicums, or, we might be more familiar with internships. We usually say practicums here. And so we've had practicum students work with the Booter Center, and not necessarily Native students all the time either, but those students have recently worked on, learning more about land acknowledgements, the meaning behind it. What other universities and institutions have land acknowledgements, and how are they, I don't want to say how are they doing or what are they doing with the land acknowledgement? What's their relationship like with those tribal nations and such? Hasn't gotten to that, but I think it's more leaving at, what is out there right now. So, the Booter Center, creates practicum opportunities for students. And also too, we also have our own in-house, kind of events that we'll put on. So we host a powwow. So our next powwow is April 6th of this year. And, we always make it as a point to, have students come check out, participate, volunteer and such, learn more about a piece of Native culture. I'm not saying that's the only thing or only place that, you can learn that. But, once again, it creates that exposure for many of the Brown School students here at WashU. And even just the, whole community, St. Louis community as a whole. And we get so many people that come outside from St. Louis, from different states as well. They check out our powwow. So there's those types of opportunities that, that happen. Another event that we host is Hunt, Fish, Gather. Usually host that in the fall time. That usually highlights Native foods. So we usually bring in a Native chef. They come in, get a little creative. So in 2022, we brought in Chef Nephi Craig, he's a White Mountain Apache and Navajo, and we had a theme for that one, which was really cool. We looked at what foods would have been hunted, fished, and gathered in this area. And, I had a practicum student that was working underneath me at that time who did research on, really examining what were those foods that were hunted, fished, and gathered over at Cahokia Mounds, and, what's other research that has revealed that and throughout time. So that was really great, being able to highlight Native foods in that type of way. And then this past year, 2023, we had Chef Brad Dry he's Cherokee from Tulsa, Oklahoma, and he highlighted Cherokee foods. So that was really cool to have that. So so we host different practicum opportunities for students here. And it may not even just be within the Booter Center. We network with, Native-led organizations or tribes, and we send our Booter scholars, the Native students who have a scholarship through the Booter Center, we'll send them out to, those places to do their practicums there. So that way, they can gain more experience and help out those organizations or those communities in different ways. So that's kind of the practicum side of things. As far as the program itself too, so we actually are the only program that has a formal American Indian Alaskan Native concentration within a social work program.
That's crazy.
Yeah, so many social work programs around the nation, I mean, they might have offer kind of courses, but they don't have an actual concentration or a pathway for students to take courses. So students, so it's not even just for Native students either, any Brown School student, whether they're in social work or public health, social policy, they could take those courses offered in our concentration. So there's one course per semester, and those are taught by Native professors as well too. So it's really great. And, you get to see maybe different Native professors each year, or, I think in general, just having Native professors on campus, as I mentioned, there's just a smaller Native community here in general. And so it's great just being able to bring those folks and gain perspective and knowledge from where they come from. Trying to think what else, what else the Booter Center does. We do so many different things here, and we offer all kinds of resources. As mentioned before, we got the Indigenous Land and History Brief, and then we got we mentioned about land acknowledgements, so we have resources for that. The Trail Marker Tree, we have a resource for that as well too. And just gotta assume that these will be all posted.
All in the show notes.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, and then, as far as my job goes too, I'm part of recruitment. So I have a real big effort on trying to go out to Native communities, in all different places. And, maybe in person, it could be virtually. That's kind of a nice thing, can save some pennies here through travel. And it's really just reaching out to Native communities, tribal colleges, other universities that might have higher populations of Native students, and just really sharing the message hey, we have scholarships out there for Native students who want to pursue a master's in social work. And we know that social workers can work in so many different areas, whether it's on a micro level, working with individuals, families, groups, to a meso level where they're working more at a community-based level, or even a macro level where we're working with, numerous tribal nations, getting into policy making type work and all those types of things. So social workers are needed in so many different areas. And so I just want to really make sure that we get that message out there that, hey, there's this opportunity for Native students to come here and get that education and get these opportunities to gain that experience and knowledge to better our people. And it doesn't even have to be their specific tribe. It could be, Native people all across, or, not even just in the United States, people in Canada, down in Mexico, all the way down into South America, because there are northern and southern relatives as well, too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it looks like you have a pretty sweet job opportunities board on your website as well. So anyone that's, obviously if you're interested in the program, it sounds like an incredible program. Go there for that. But then also check out this employment job opportunities board, which I can put in the show notes, because it looks like a lot of it could apply, in multiple ways. So it could definitely, even if you're in, cultural resources or anthropology or something like that, some of these would apply to both. So check it out. All right. What do you think that the Booter Center offers that is the most impactful, or like, what have you heard from students that has been the most important aspect of having the Booter Center there for them?
Yeah, a couple different things. Like, one is obviously having this American Indian, Alaska Native concentration, having those courses, because, it's not, those types of things aren't always offered in other social work programs. So I think really getting to know other Native students that come from other parts of, the United States, other places, and really learning like where they're coming from, what their culture is about. And it's really connecting and bringing, Native people together in that type of way. But also too, like the Brown School and this program, it's one of the top ranking social work programs, graduate degree programs in the nation. So when students are coming out of here, like, and they're entering the workforce, like they are ready to go. And the things that they're dealing with, they feel very prepared, and they feel like they can handle like a lot of that work that's being thrown at them. I kind of mentioned to the students I prepared, I don't want to freak them out, but I'm like, in a way, it kind of almost, you're going to have your work cut out for you. It's going to feel almost like a boot camp, but this is going to be in a good way. Like, it's going to challenge you. It's going to push you in a good way. And when you come out of here, you're going to become so much of a better person, ready to take on whatever's thrown at you. And that's what we want as far as like, especially creating more leaders out there in the world, Indigenous leaders that can, pave the way and, bring in more, prosperity to our people.
Okay. So when you're thinking about like the Booter Center or your research or just where you would like to take things in the future, what comes to mind on the things that you'd like to do?
Yeah. I think it's just working with our team and falling back on the mission of the Booter Center, supporting Native students who want to receive their master's in social work, relaying that message, getting that message out there that, hey, like there's scholarship opportunities for Native students. So really making sure that, Native people are aware of this type of opportunity to get a top education and to enhance, your knowledge and skills and becoming a leader out there and supporting our people. So there's that side of it. And also too, I think it's also creating, more collaborations and partnerships with local organizations and institutions that keep on building that up. Because with that, we're just going to keep on building that awareness and those educational opportunities for our non-Native community. And we need to do that here. And also too, networking with the tribes with the ancestral connections here in St. Louis, making sure that, hey, we're going to support them. And if they want to be involved in some type of, project here, or they need assistance with, how do they, protect a site, here in the area, and, whatever type of support that Native people need to have, like, we're going to be there. And that kind of even touches on to how do we even support like the local Native community, because there's no Urban Indian Center here. There's no other type of Native-led organization here that Native people can fall back on to build that community up and provide support. That's one thing I know, like, one of our community members has touched on was actually trying to create an Urban Indian Center. And we're going to have a meeting with a member of the director of the Kansas City Urban Indian Center and kind of really assess like what are things that we have to do on our part to get that rolling here. Because they used to be here back in, when my grandparents were here, and it went away during, I think, the late 90s, early 2000s. And so there's those hardships there. And, our community also has to face some other hardships. Like there's no Indian health services here. So like, for my father, like he can't receive, healthcare here in St. Louis. The closest facility would be, I think, at Haskell University in Lawrence, Kansas. So that'd be like a 4.5-hour drive for him to receive those types of healthcare services and like other Native folk. Yeah, so that's definitely a challenge that, so those are the types of things I think we definitely want to try and move forward on and bettering our community and supporting Native people.
Yeah. All right. Well, we're at the end of our time, but any last burning thoughts?
Oh, of course. Plenty of thoughts. We could keep going. But I understand everybody has lives and can't listen to our podcast episode forever. Yeah. So, I would like to say, especially to non-Native community, is to keep on learning, get out there, build relationships with Native people, keep learning more about, obviously like our history, but we're not people of just the past. We're still here. Find ways of how you can help our people out. A simple thing, it could be donating or maybe purchasing, items through a Native business or, anything like that, attend events such as like a powwow or something, just to make you more aware. And it gets you outside of just reading about us in books or research articles and, and besides the movies too, like Dances with Wolves or something. Yeah. So make sure that you're engaging, you're updating yourself on what's kind of happening in our communities. There's like a lot of issues that, are still happening and, that still contribute to like our erasure and, that affect our prosperity moving forward. So, and, that's even like one thing, like dealing here, like in St. Louis, like it was hard for me, like, as I mentioned, like with identifying as being Native, it's hard connecting with people that, my people who are far away, my relatives, and I even had to do that work myself. But unfortunately, too, there's conversations within, communities that might go on like, well, who's Native and stuff like, kind of like you have like these gatekeepers out there. So I want people to kind of be aware, too, like, there's erasure that's like kind of, colonial erasure. But then there's also erasure that, kind of happens with our own communities because of that whole mindset is being carried on into our people. Such as like things like tribal enrollment. Like I understand the purpose of tribal enrollment and all that. And, I'm not enrolled in my tribes, but, like one thing that I face is, as I mentioned, like, if we go talk about like blood quantum and things like that, I'm 50%, I'm 25% Zuni, 25% Choctaw. And unfortunately, due to these colonial structures and these types of rules, like I can't enroll into either tribe. Like Mississippi Band of Choctaw Indians, you have to be 50% their tribe. I can't enroll into them. And my dad's enrolled into their tribe. I do, however, make the blood quantum for the Zuni, which requires 25%. But your parent has to be enrolled with their tribe. So there's these types of structures that are built there. And, I understand like our people, tribal governments create constitutions to, have those rules in place and everything. But some people are out there, saying that, like, hey, well, you don't have a tribal ID card. And, how can you say you're Native or, you're Choctaw or you're Zuni and you don't have a tribal ID card and stuff. And, if we're just looking at blood quantum, like, does that really constitute as being Native? Because, tribes too, like, tribes are in control of making these blood quantum rules and, into their constitution. So, how can someone who could be potentially have less blood quantum and enrolled into their tribe tell me that, and if I have more technically Native blood than them, tell me I'm not Native? Like, that's erasing our people over time. And I think the big picture that people don't realize is that ultimately a lot of these things happen because the federal government wants to take over our lands and resources. And so, let's say over time that, there's people that can't enroll into the tribe because they don't make that blood quantum due to what's written into their constitutions. Well, then the government can, terminate that tribe and say like, hey, well, there's no longer a group, people that can technically enroll to your tribe. There's no tribe there then. So now your lands are going to be susceptible for us to take over. So I think people are missing the big picture on some of these types of issues that are happening with Native people and communities and such. And we have to kind of rethink that and really touch back on our Indigenous, views and knowledges and beliefs as well, too, to take a step back because, colonialism has really messed things up. So I just wanted to make sure that people are out there becoming more aware of like some of these different dynamics that do affect Native people.
Yeah. And I just want to say thank you so much for all of your work, bringing students into social work, all of your work with archaeologists and the local Indigenous community and tribes that are, have been forced off of their land. So just thank you. And also, I think it's a really good example of areas where people in cultural resources or anthropology have a lot more potential partners out there in the community that they might not recognize because they're not seeing them as, specifically anthropology or cultural resources or tribes or whatever, but that there are a lot of other organizations that are trying to do similar work that we could partner with and bring to the table. So thank you. And thank you for coming on today. Yeah, excited to see where you and all of your students go with all of this in the future.
Yeah, thanks, Jessica. No, this has been great. And, if anyone is interested into coming to St. Louis to WashU, the Brown School, and enter into the social work program here, please contact us and we'll more than happy help you out and guide you how to become a social worker.
Awesome. Is there a specific way for them to reach out to you or?
Yeah, so if you visit our website, you could probably just Google, search Kathryn M Center for American Indian Studies at WashU or Washington University in St. Louis. It should automatically pop up. So there's that. And could we share the link with everyone?
Absolutely. Yeah. Looks like there's a contact page. So we will share the link for that specifically within the show notes as well. Yeah. Well, thank you again. And also everyone for your reference, Booter, Buder, just so you know. Thanks for listening to the Heritage Voices podcast. You can find show notes at www.archaeologypodcastnetwork.com/heritage voices. Please subscribe to the show on iTunes, Stitcher, or the Google Play Music Store. Also, please share with your friends or write us a review. Sharing and reviewing helps more people find the show and gets the perspectives of Heritage Voices' amazing guests out there into the world. Don't we just need more of that in anthropology and land management? If you have any more questions, comments, or show suggestions, please reach out to me at jessica@livingheritageanthropology.org. If you'd like to volunteer to be on the show as a guest or even a co-host, reach out to me as well, jessica@livingheritageanthropology.org. You can also follow more of what I'm doing on Facebook at Living Heritage Anthropology and the nonprofit Living Heritage Research Council, or on Twitter at Living Heritage A. As always, huge thank you to Lyle Belenqua and Jason Nez for their collaboration on our incredible logo.
This episode was produced by Chris Webster from his RV traveling the United States, Tristan Boyle in Scotland, DigTech LLC, Culturo Media, and the Archaeology Podcast Network, and was edited by Chris Webster and Rachel Roden.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.archpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.